Hi everyone, Sam here from Accuracy Obsession. I'm going to walk you guys through the installation and rebonding process of the Obsession chassis to your AW, AT, or AX action. The previous videos I made showed you how to take everything apart, debond it, clean it, and prep it. So basically starting as if we're ready to go. So I'll walk through what's in the kit, how to get everything ready, and how to bond it together. So with the kit, everything you need is going to be included other than a few simple hand tools. So you're going to get the epoxy, well I should say putty, it's the DevCon aluminum putty. Basically I have a measured amount, it's like a 9-to-1 ratio, but it comes in a big 1-pound jar that's like $60, but you gotta mix it together in the right amount, so it'd just be crazy to do that whole amount. You don't need it that much. This will be more than enough, I think. Some tools, a mixing spatula, and some acid brushes. Then on your own, just grab some Q-tips. You'll want some paper towel or a cotton rag, some isopropyl alcohol, possibly acetone, or a degreasing agent of some sort. Basically what you're going to want to do, and what I've already done, is cleaned after I scraped off all the epoxy. I've cleaned this with some acetone to make sure that the surface is prepped. There's some degreasing agents that may or may not be better. I don't really know. And then with the chassis, which I've got here, I've cleaned this with the isopropyl alcohol. Now I've got the 99% alcohol that I got from Amazon to clean it. I didn't want to use acetone on the Cerakote. I'm not sure how well that works, but again, you could use some degreasing or whatever you've got on hand should work, as long as it's clean. You want that surface to be free of any oil. That's also why I'm wearing gloves. I cleaned it, put some gloves on, so I make sure not to have the oils from my hands transfer. Then you'll also have all of these pieces are included in the kit. You've got your 4 brass washers that comes off of your AT or AX or AW. To make sure that those are cleaned off, got the epoxy as good as you can. There's the 4 alignment rods here, the 2 rear action screws which you've taken off from your current chassis and reuse. Then there's 2 new front screws, and then there's 2 new flathead screws for the rear buttstock tang. Those can strip easily, so it's much better to just put new ones on. I've got a 55 inch-pound fix-it stick. You can use your Borka or Wheeler, whatever you've got, but when you do the action screws, you're going to do 55 inch-pounds. And then a 4mm and a 3mm Allen. I've got my fix-it stick thing, but any hand Allen wrench will be all that you need. So to get started, the first thing we're going to do is get the alignment rods in. So all you need is a couple turns. You don't need to put them in all the way and bottom them out, because we'll be removing these. The long ones are for the front. The reason being, if you ever decided to take the chassis off and put the AT chassis back on, you need the long ones in the front because of just how big that hump is. If you have the short ones, it's really hard to get them out. So you've got those 4 alignment rods in, and then over each rod put one of the brass washers. This is an interesting part of the AI design. The washer is what separates the action and the chassis and defines the thickness. So if you just put the 2 halves together with epoxy and no washer, it would just squish it out until it was the minimum thickness of the epoxy. I don't know, a couple thousandths of an inch. It'd be hard to make it level front to back. With this, these are like 31 thousandths of an inch thick. That's why guys say they could run this with or without epoxy. That defines the depth, make sure the magazine is positioned properly. So my design is the same as a factory AI when you look at them together. So the distance between these screws and the recoil lug is the same, and it's designed to have some epoxy in between there. And this distance is the same. All of that is designed exactly like AI. I think something like the MPA chassis for the AT is slightly different to have full contact on the recoil lug. I'm not entirely sure, but I decided to make it as if AI made it. That was kind of my intent. So one other thing I didn't mention for prep is to get some masking tape or painter's tape like I have, sticky side out, press it in all the way into this internal tenon. So I have the tape going all the way in, and press it up into the quick lock barrel feature. And what this is going to do is prevent any excess epoxy that might flow in there from going into the tenon threads. It's kind of a precautionary measure. The way that we're going to apply it shouldn't get in there. And like some people have seen when they debond it, they get some epoxy on the actual quick lock screw tangs here. We're going to completely avoid that so that there's no issue with it clamping down. But if you didn't tape it and you got a ton of stuff in there, you'd have to clean out the tenon threads with some acetone, and it'd be a real pain in the butt to do that. So now that we've got this ready, we'll just check the fitment. One other thing I've got is just some painter's tape on the outside edge, so if any epoxy runs down, which it probably will, it's easy to clean off. A little bit on the inside, just make sure it doesn't go onto the mating surface. These aren't really necessary, it just makes cleanup a little easier. So what you're going to end up doing when all the epoxy is on there and you can test the fitment is you put it on the alignment rods like that, and then you're going to gently nudge the chassis forward as if the action was being pressed rearward under recoil, just like you normally would. And when there's epoxy in there, it's going to be real gentle. You don't need to force it. And then we're going to take the alignment rods out and replace it with a screw, and that'll make sure that washer stays in the hole. If we did it the other way with the chassis facing up, I can't figure out a good way to keep those washers in place unless you're kind of painting the epoxy around it. So I don't know how AI does it. They might do it inverse of this, but through the few times I've done this, it's the easiest way I found to be consistent, especially if you're doing it for the first time. So that's the method that we're going to use, and it makes it pretty foolproof. Alright, so our epoxy, we've got the two parts. You got to mix them all together. So there's the resin and the hardener. There's more of the gray one than there is the white one here. So what I'm going to try to do, my best, is to just scoop all of the white into the gray and then stir it up. Doesn't have to be perfect, the exact amount. I measured to my best ability to get that 9:1 ratio. But with this little plastic tool, you should be able to scrape it pretty good with a little spatula. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm just going to take this and mix it, stir it up. Based on this, I might put something a little stiffer in the kit. This little flexible thing is a little bit of a pain to get stirred, but now it seems to be going together. And once you've got this mixed together, I mean, I think the instructions say to mix it for a couple minutes. So you definitely want to make sure it's all integrated together, especially because it is that 9-to-1 ratio. You don't want to have the hardener just hanging out, not mixed in. But once you've got it together, you've got a decent amount of working time. So I think it's something like, it's an hour or two. The epoxy that I used with the first assembly times that I did it, it got pretty hard after like 30 or 45 minutes, so it's kind of hard to work with. But if you go through this and it takes you longer than you think, or it doesn't look like you're going to be able to get to the buttstock in time, what you can do is just buy that DevCon 2-part plastic steel epoxy from Amazon or Ace Hardware. It's like $5 or $6. That comes with the buttstock kit. There's no downside to using that. You just mix it 1-to-1 together with a Q-tip and do the buttstock. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to do the buttstock with this as well at the end. So just do it all in one shot. And really, this shouldn't take too long. This will be faster than applying that liquid epoxy. That was a real pain in the butt. So now that we've got it mixed pretty well, just make sure you've got your isopropyl alcohol or whatever you want to use with a rag, so that when you do have some excess, you can wipe it off. This will be a little bit messy. And what we're going to do is apply the majority of it to the action. And then there's a couple spots we'll apply it to the chassis. So I'll try to kind of get in here and show you. So where we're going to apply it, front to back, back to front, doesn't matter which way you do it. But we're going to apply it here, then here on the face of the Recoil Lug, front and rear. Then we're going to paint the whole Recoil Lug. Basically, this is what I'd call the most important zone, is here, here, the whole Recoil Lug. And then we've got to do these edges, and then we've got to do this rear tang area. And if you look at the chassis to kind of figure out where you need to paint, you can see how it lines up with the front here, this area, and then this pocket. This front pocket, we don't want anything in because that's a quick lock tang. And here, these inside edges. This area, I'll paint on the chassis right here, because when you try to paint on the action, it's hard to know exactly where it is and you tend to get excess. So really you just don't want it to go in this magazine catch area, and you don't want anything in here. This is where the trigger pack goes, so if you put some in between these two tangs, it'll just leak right in there. You don't want that. And I'll provide some images as well of exactly where to apply it. So basically we're just going to start painting it on. Like I said, you don't have to follow the video. You can do it front to back or back to front, whatever works for you. So I'm going to start using this short brush and just paint it on. So the key is you want it to be as thick or thicker than the washer. So if you paint it on too thin, it's not going to contact both sides, right? So say you put a layer that's 20 thousandths thick, it's not going to be able to contact the front or the top and bottom, and then it'll just be like a gap. So you don't really want that. So you want it thick enough that it's going to touch. I've got like a little bit of excess in the front, so when you get some excess, you can just wipe it. Like this area, if you look at what your AT looked like when you debonded it, it might have been fully contacted this whole area. I don't really bother with trying to get that fully contacted because the closer you get to that quick lock area, the more likely it's going to go in there, which is what we don't want, obviously. And you want to get a good amount on the recoil lug in that hole. It's like an overflow area. You don't want to paint really on the washers because that might mess with the thickness a little bit, so you're trying to just paint around it. And again, if it looks like it's the same thickness or a little thicker than the washer itself, you're good. If you get a little bit on the alignment rod, don't worry about it. That's not threading into anything. So this is the back of the recoil lug. It's going to have a pretty thin contact area with the actual chassis, but you're going to want to make sure that it's got a good amount there so that when you squeeze it together it's perfectly contacted. Again, I'm just trying to paint around this best I can. Really gob it in the middle there. And we'll give a little bit extra inside the actual chassis itself in this area too. This is where just have your Q-tip or rag on hand. If you get a little bit on the outside edge of the action, it's not the end of the world. It'll squirt out because of the design actually goes up the side, whereas like the AT is follows the contour of it exactly. It's got a little Q-tip here. So it's looking pretty good. It's pretty gobbed on there. This was harder with the epoxy because it was so thin that it would almost run out and be harder to get the thickness that you wanted until it started to harden. So I think this putty really is the way to go. And here in the front, just make sure that you've got the frontmost edge encompassed, and if it squirts out the front, that's okay. The factory ones are going to have like this edge completely done here and here. I wouldn't even worry about it. I don't think it's needed. If you want to try and get it, you can, by all means. It was easier with the epoxy, I think, to lay like a really thin bead, but I don't think it really matters, to be honest. So here in the front, you don't want to go all the way to the mag well. You see, there is room, but you don't want to get that extra material squeezing out in the mag well, so I'm just a little more conservative with that. So if we move to the back, you could try to get this here if you'd like. Maybe it's a good idea to try to get a little bit on there, and then we'll get a little bit on the chassis as well. But you really don't want much, and you don't want it going into the mag well, so it's a little bit of a gentle touch. So this definitely right now isn't thick enough to be contacted in there, but when we put some on the chassis as well, it should get there. Alright, then the back of the mag well, you don't want to go crazy with that because of the geometry of the chassis. I'll show that again, where that lines up. So you see, if you just paint it across the rear, that would be where that mag latch cutout is. So that area we're going to be a little more cautious, and we'll paint on the chassis for that. So we'll move back to the rear, where we're going to paint basically around that hole. That hole is for the bolt stop. If you ever need to get that bolt stop out, there's a roll pin that drives out, and there's a notch in the chassis that lets you drive that roll pin out without having to debond everything. So needs to be there. My design has it on both sides of the chassis. That's why it's ambidextrous. The AI version does not. It's on one side. So that was a feature I put in because I shoot left-handed. So here we're gonna paint it nice and thick, and if you want that nice perfect looking bead on the outside of it, you'll have to paint around the edge, outside edge of that washer. Sorry if that's kind of hard to see. Try not to get my hand in the way here. So you can be a little more generous in the rear here. And again, if you look at what your chassis looked like when you debonded it, chances are there was just a ton of it in the back here. So you can kind of glob it on in the rear, as long as you don't encroach on where the trigger pack is, and then the rear trigger pack screw. And make sure that when you do these two rear action screws, you do not paint in between them. That's a no-no. See what we're looking in front here. I mean, if you want to try to apply it with a Q-tip or something else, by all means go for it. I don't know that this acid brush is perfect. Maybe I'll try to include something a little bit different. You don't have a lot of room in the rear behind that screw. So I kind of got it on the threads there. I'll have to clean that out. But if you want that nice bead, that's how you get it. really the thing to remember is just it's easier to clean it now than it is once it's bonded together. I'm just going to wipe this so I don't get it everywhere. Now I'm just trying to get the inside of those washers. It's kind of a tight spot to get at without just gobbing it everywhere. There, I just got a little bit too much. Just wipe that off. Trying to think if using a Q-tip will be a little bit easier not to get in that little spot, or maybe like a toothpick or something like that. Just kind of thinking out loud here as I do that. Maybe I'll send you a brush that I cut at an angle instead of straight across like this. So it does just, it's a little bit big. I think this might be part of AI doing it in the chassis, not the action, so that this is a little bit easier to do. Also, you know, those people are doing it day in and day out, you know, hundreds of them or whatever, where I've done this a half dozen times, and you know, you guys are going to be doing it for the first time, so understand there's a little bit of a learning curve with it. Just need a little bit more thickness there. So let's see how that looks. So I'll clean up. Alright, so that's looking pretty good, so I think I'm going to try to paint the chassis now. Do my best to get it in the frame where I'm doing it. Let's see. Just take this out. Set that aside. Alright. Probably be easier to do. So where we were trying to go was the inside of this here, this area here behind the mag catch and in between the trigger pack, and then inside this recoil lug pocket. We're going to give it a little extra juice there. So here. I just want to make sure that this is thick enough so that the two halves touch, but you don't want so much that it's going to completely goober out everywhere, and that's why I put a little bit of tape on the inside of there. So that looks pretty good. I mean, if you wanted, you could do the inside of this instead of painting the action. I think both would be fine. I mean, if you think you got a little bit of a thin spot somewhere or something, you could, you know, just lightly brush this area so that it's got it covered. Just like we're gonna do with the magwell area. You know, if you think, oh, this spot was a little bit thin where I put it, I'm just kind of doing this as an example. I don't know that I really need it. But you could paint this, and maybe even the back side, that would be a little bit easier to do around there. So if you thought that you needed a little bit of extra right there, that would kind of have you covered and give you that extra material to squish out. And you can see here where that extra material is around that washer. You know, if you want that perfect bead around the outside, if you give it a little bit here, but you don't want it to be so much that it's actually the washer is butting up against it and messing with that thickness. So if you do this, I'll kind of show you what I would do. And you get it a little bit around the outside. That's going to be excess you're going to have to clean up anyway. Is I would make sure that you have a nice clean spot around that for the washer. Just like that. Then for that inside of the magwell, I really don't think this is a super important spot to bond, but if you want to make it perfect, you know, you just get a little bit. It's going to be hard no matter what you do. This is really hard to do with the liquid epoxy as well, to get it perfect. You know, if you wanted to tape the inside of this magwell with painter's tape, you could. I think it would just be easier to wipe the excess. I think with an AT it's probably easier because you could just gob it in here and then wipe the outside. This is it's gonna be a tight fit if it's on these inner side rails, so I might just wipe those down. Same with the inside of the magwell, because if you do this, once you bolt it together, if that inside of the magwell has a bunch, like I just got kind of a gob there, and that dries, it's just going to be a real pain in the butt to get to after the fact. But if you get it now, let me get another Q-tip. So I get that with the Q-tip. Inside. Let's put that a little bit here, a little bit here. I think that's pretty good. And then lastly, the recoil lug pocket area. Which we already did put a lot in, but we're going to want to make sure that these corner overfill, let's see, in here, these corners have some in there, and then again just the contacting recoil face. I'm just going to paint a little bit extra on there to make sure that we've got nice full contact. At any point, if you feel like it's getting kind of stringy or anything, just mix it back up. It's feeling pretty consistent from when I first started mixing it. Whenever that was, 15-20 minutes ago. Just get a good dab there. A little bit of extra here is fine. As long as you don't just completely gob it into the hole. Meaning the action screw hole. And if it goes onto the faces, that's totally fine. Put a little bit in the middle. Again, this is the most important area. So other than going into the holes and getting on the screw, there's not really any risk of having a little bit extra. So once you get this stuff all gobbed in there, I'm just gonna make sure the hole's cleaned out. And this again is just to ensure that we've got perfect epoxy contact everywhere. So I'm just gonna make sure this hole is wiped out and give a little bit of room for the washer. Don't go too nuts on the alcohol either here, because you don't want it to ruin the epoxy, because the alcohol does clean it up a little bit. So I'm just gonna make room for those washers and wipe a little bit of the excess on the side, which it'll get squirted out anyway, not a big deal. Pardon my camera work here. Just trying to wipe that. So I think that's pretty good. So what we're gonna do is take the chassis out, put the action back in there so we can assemble it upside down basically. Try not to get covered in epoxy. Some clean gloves. Alright, so basically, just going to do what we did when we tested the fit. Flip the chassis upside down, go over the alignment holes, and we'll just look and see if we got any gaps in epoxy anywhere. It's looking pretty good. In the front, the recoil lug, that rear area looks good to me. I think we're good. So flip it. Do our best to align it with the long holes first in front. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lower it slowly. And you'll kind of start to see stuff squish out. And then, like I mentioned before, kind of press it down. And if you can, push forward gently on the chassis. So pushing forward on the chassis is the same as pushing rearward on the action, which is how the recoil is going to be. So the gun recoils rearward. You need that rear recoil lug pressing into it. Doesn't need to be too hard, and you can kind of see if it sticks or not. It's going to want to tilt forward because the fore end of the chassis is heavy. So what you want to do is get one of your rear action screws, the one that came from your AT, unscrew one of these rear alignment rods, then you're going to put that action screw in. Take your 4mm wrench, and at this point just finger tight, and then you can do the other rear one. And what this is doing is we're taking the alignment rod out and that washer is staying right in place. So second screw, same rear action screw from your factory AT. It's finger tight. On the front ones, these screws are included in the kit. The ones from your AT will not work. They'll be way too long. So these are included. Look like that. Same 4mm. Last alignment rod. Okay, so you can give it a quick look. Looks like it's squirted out pretty evenly. I can see some of it on the side, some of it in the front. If you don't have it perfect, that perfect bead that AI does around the backside, there's really no problem with that. If you want that perfect bead, put in way more epoxy than you think you need and clean it up. I'd prefer not to. I'm more concerned with the front recoil lug than anything. But that's ultimately your choice if you want to do that or not. So then from here, again, I'll just make sure that the chassis is pushed forward. I'm going to go basically hand tight. And then we're going to torque to 55 inch-pounds using whatever torque wrench you prefer. And this torque is being applied to those washers. So the distance is going to be perfect, even front and rear. So I'll do the front action screws first at 55. Check them. After this is assembled and has 24 hours to cure, I'll just double check these, make sure, but there's not really much to do about that. Alright, so now before we do the buttstock, we got to clean up. So what you're going to be looking for is inside of the mag well. You want to make sure that any excess is cleaned up. I've got a little bit here. The outside edges, and the outside edges are more cosmetic than anything, but the inside edges, you know, could affect the function of it. And then a big thing too is inside of the trigger pack area. You want to make sure that that gets cleaned up, because that could interfere with the positioning of the trigger itself. So really just Q-tips and some isopropyl alcohol or your friend, whatever you can do to get in there and clean it out. Like this one in the rear, I got a little bit by the screw where the trigger goes into, so I'll just do my best to get that. Kind of just twisting it in there helps. Sorry I can't show it really well on camera. There is a lot of slop in this, but obviously if this is in the way now and it hardens, it's going to be really hard to get at it after the fact. Maybe some of those Q-tips on wooden dowels would make it a little bit easier, because it's got a little bit of a flex to it. Okay, then inside the mag well, same thing. Might be easier to get at from actually inside the action port. You might be able to see it a little better. I'll see if I can get that on camera. I'm just going to wipe the outside of it with some alcohol and a rag. Once you get the stuff on your hands, you just try not to get it on the rifle itself. See here, I'll try to move the camera a little bit. So you can see a little bit. See? Make sure that's held on tight. Not like me. Just set it down here. So you can see this, a nice bead around the outside. It's not perfect like the AI one, but you don't see it. It's covered by the skins. So I can see I had a little bit of a gap. I don't know if you can see it in this corner right here, where it didn't have that bead perfectly all the way around. So that would be a spot where, you know, I could have used a little bit more to get that perfect bead. But that's not really gonna matter. I mean, if you really want to, you could kind of, I guess I could show you, you could take this chisel tool. This is just a quick fix if you really wanted it to get in there. You'll have to clean it up, but just kind of get some around the edge with that tool if you've got a little missing spot that you want. And then take your rag and just wipe the excess. And there's your fix for it not being perfect around the corner. Which, I'm good with that. I know appearance does matter. I mean, I spent a lot of time designing this thing to what I thought looked cool. I know it might not be for everybody. But I know that something like that, or those little details that do matter. I got a little bit of, sorry if you guys can't see this. Trying my best here. There's a little bit along this edge. Yeah, I would say probably go a little easier than I did around that edge. I got a little bit of excess there I'll have to get at. And then, so we'll get the inside of the mag well real well, no pun intended. So I'm just gonna soak this rag, really just go in through the top port. You know, this is impossible for you guys to see, it's hard for me to see myself. But through there makes it a lot easier. But if you gotta reach in with your finger, this is taking care of it pretty well. There's no harm in just getting that rag completely soaked. And I got pretty much all of it. A little bit on the inside there. Get out the Q-tip. Sorry about this video, guys. This part is, you'll see once you do it, it's just kind of hard to get at. I think that maybe some of those wooden sticked Q-tips would make it a little bit easier, but honestly we didn't put a ton in there because that area is a bit of a pain to get at. So that looks pretty good. Just gonna soak this and try to get at the inside of this trigger pack a little bit more. And then last but not least, let's see if I can way. It's going to be really hard to get at this, but the inside of the barrel tenon. So I didn't get any on there, which is a good sign. The front of the action has a little bit that's squirted out. Again, that's an area that might look perfect on the AI and might not look perfect on yours if you didn't use a ton and completely squirt it, but that's okay. The key is just making sure that clean the entire action face, make sure there's nothing there, and then for good measure, what I like to do is if you have acetone, I like to get your rag with acetone and give it the old finger just to make sure the acetone will really cut through that epoxy and make sure that if there were to be anything in there it would get it. Now I'm not seeing anything, which is good. You can look in there with a flashlight, you'd see it right away, but that tape will stop it. But it's an 1.5 inch tenon, so you can get your finger in there and clean it. You know, this is just dirty, but there's no actual epoxy. And then it looks like from here, the only thing I really need to clean up is just the little edge around the chassis, which is just kind of hard because I don't have much of a fingernail. It looks like a toothpick would make it easier to do that. The outside of the back here looks really good actually, in terms of nice bead around the outside. The pocket for the bolt stop is clear. And again, this gets covered up by the skin, so it doesn't really matter. But it's nice to know that that bonding agent is there and nothing's got a major gap or anything. One other spot I just noticed is the top side of this. I can see a little bit. I don't honestly know that will affect anything. That's where the trigger sear interfaces with the bolt. So obviously you want it clear, but it's one more spot to check to make sure nothing is completely gobbed out of control. Just give the rear action screw a little bit. Sorry this is taking so long. I'm just being meticulous, and I'll show you guys how to do the buttstock, and then that will be it. Seems like a Q-tip press down really hard works well on the edge of that to get any of that excess out. Seems to be working well. Again, what I showed in the video, if you hopefully watched the video first, just don't use quite as much on that edge and you'll be fine. So I'll give it one more look over. Yeah, the front looks real good. See if I can get the front on camera. It's hard. It's a nice bead there along the front edge. Just gonna flip it over. Do the buttstock. Just that little bit in here that I'm trying to get. I'm getting it. This is where the wooden doweled Q-tips would be money. Or even like a long toothpick. I think I'll just put that in the instructions, that will help. But I think that's pretty good. So, onto the buttstock, which is real easy in comparison to all of that shenanigans, which still isn't bad. So you've got your tang in the rear, and you've got your buttstock. If you're reusing your AT or your AX, doesn't matter. It's got this square tube interface. Basically slides over, you bolt it on. To get to this point you would have had to have debonded it, so you know what I'm talking about. But the key is, when it's bolted together, top and down it's real tight, but left to right there's a little bit of wiggle. So what you want to make sure that you get is these side pockets here. Make sure those are filled up real well. So what you're trying to do is cover the rear tang. It's going to squirt out everywhere. You're going to need more Q-tips. But you want to cover this area here. You don't really need it to get real close here because it'll squirt out. And then on the sides, you want to make sure those sides are filled real nicely. So basically, I don't think you have to be as cautious as with the chassis. And here at this point, I'm just mixing up the putty again. If you feel like that chassis took you like an hour or something to do and you think the putty is cured too much, you can just take a break, buy that DevCon from your Ace Hardware or Amazon. I can include the part number in the instructions. It's like $5, and you can go that route. I'm just gonna do it now because this is the easy part. It really doesn't matter much if it's completely gobbed on. You just don't need to get it in the threads of the holes. You don't want to put it in that rear like moon-shaped hole. That's where the thumb rest or the folding stock capture goes through. So I can tell at this point this putty's started to harden. So if I had done the chassis a little bit faster, it might have been better if I would have I don't know, I mean, if you wanted to, you could do the buttstock first. So it's so quick and you don't have to deal with it, but it might kind of get in the way. I mean, this is all gonna squirt out, so you don't have to follow this to a T. I think based on this, what I might do is just include 2 of these containers of epoxy. It'll cost me a little bit more money, but that way you can do the chassis and then do the buttstock separately. Or worst case scenario, you start the epoxy on the chassis and you think you want to clean it and start over, you'll have it, because like I said, it is that aluminum putty, which isn't available like locally at Ace or anything like that. So I think I'll do that. So when you're seeing this, don't worry about it. It is a little thick, but it's just, it takes 24 hours to cure. I think it's just harder to work with. I don't think it's going to affect the performance of it at all, but I think to make life easier on you guys, if I measure out 2 kits of the putty, it'll just make it better for you. That way you can do the chassis, clean it up, and just mix together a brand new one and then have it be easy peasy. So that should be good. I'm going to put the buttstock on. I've got the 2 screws. I don't have a torque value for these screws, so I just do hand tight, but they're 3mm flatheads, so you can definitely over crank on them too hard. So, and you can see that when you push it on, most of it squirts forward and mushes out the front. So I mean, I'm not even anywhere near the hole being lined up and it's all gobbing out like crazy. And with this, just do like finger tight on the top and then flip it and do the bottom side. You don't want to crank it down completely. You can see how much excess came out on the bottom side. So even that little bit that I had on there just came out like crazy. And this is real easy to clean up. You know, even this one, it's started to harden a little bit. So that one I just kind of did finger tight as well. Clean it up a little bit more. Now at this point, just cleaning it up and tightening it. That's it. This is under the skins too, so it doesn't matter what it looks like, but obviously you don't want it to just be completely gobbed everywhere. And here, just going to tighten it. These screws are kind of notorious for wanting to round off, so once you feel it, don't force it and strip it out. Tighten the bottom. Same thing. Hand tight. It's a 4mm, so it might be something like 30 or 35 inch-pounds if you're looking to torque it, but I couldn't find one in the Armor's manual what the actual torque spec was supposed to be, so unfortunately I can't tell you that one. I've never torqued it. Want that nice even bead around. And that's pretty much it. So assembly is just like you took it apart. I'll include instructions on how to put the weight kit on and stuff like that. This chassis that you just saw here is the machined prototype, so I'm waiting for the production version to get machined now, but match season is going to start soon, so obviously I'm going to use this. This is the prototype. I'll keep using it and testing it, or whatever you want to say, basically just shooting it because it's badass. And the differences I've talked about in the forum posts and everything like that. So that's it. I don't know what the total time was. Maybe something like an hour. Me talking and trying to walk everyone through it. You know, I think I could do it faster. And I think having that second kit of the putty will help everybody with the buttstock. Make it easier so you have more time to just focus on cleaning it up, and you might get something like this where there's a little bit of dab on there from my gloves, so I like to go over that, make sure that everything's cleaned up to your liking so that you don't get surprised with a little spot that won't clean up after it's dried. So it might be a good idea just to wipe all around it and, you know, use multiple pairs of gloves, because now I got more of it on my hands. But there it is. And so I would give it the 24 hours to cure, especially the buttstock, because you just want it to make sure there's none of that side to side wiggle until it cures, and then assemble it per normal. You know, I can do a video too. The magazine catch is kind of a pain, but I have the included assembly dowel to make that a little bit better. Otherwise, that's all I can really think of right now. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it was kind of lengthy and tried to be as detailed as possible. I'm hoping that it eliminates some of the fear that you guys have about doing this. You know, it took some time, but like I told people, I think it's about an afternoon's worth of work to debond it and clean it. You know, maybe take an hour or two, have some lunch, have a beer, come back at this, make sure everything's prepped and cleaned, and you know, this took an hour to explain everything through it. But if you got a plan of attack, and I think if you have a couple different tools that I didn't have in this video, like the wooden handled Q-tips, maybe some toothpicks would help, and maybe an angled brush would help. I think that would cut some time out too, but there's really no real need to rush through it. You can see it's not too bad when you take your time, and I don't see any areas of excess that are going to get in the way. There's a nice clean bead around the outside edge. And like I showed you can fill it in really if you want to make that look flawless. That's it for the Obsession chassis. So hopefully some of you guys are interested that were maybe on the fence. Sam B300 on Sniper's Hide, Accuracy Obsession LLC on Facebook, Accuracy_Obsession on Instagram. You can direct message me any way that you want to on any of those platforms, and I'll get back to you right away. Or my email is sam.accuracy.obsession@gmail.com. Shoot me a direct email. I really want to get these chassis out there in everybody's hands. I know they're kind of pricey, but unfortunately the prototypes and this whole process was kind of expensive on my end. So to be completely honest with you guys, I'm trying to break even on this project. I'm really not trying to get rich or get a new kitchen for my house or something like that. This is an obsessive product for me, and that's why my company name is what it is, because I love AIs and I just can't stop, even though I want to and don't want to spend the money and don't want to do it. But this is really a product of passion and, you know, kind of love for the AI system. So hopefully you guys see that and aren't turned off by the fact that it's $1,200 for a chassis, but I think it's getting you something that nothing else can with this bomb-proof action, this folding hinge, this stock. I mean, it's, to me, the ultimate gamer gun that's also an AI to hell and back bomb-proof. So that's my pitch. Like I said, shoot me a message or get a hold of me any way you want. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for watching. Bye.